Good evening, everybody. Just waiting for everybody to join and hoping you can all hear me. But thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's lovely to have you all here. This is a really exciting event and designed for parents who are just at that early stage of looking into the option of US surrogacy as a way of building their family. And we at NJ Law and Brilliant Beginnings are delighted to be joined this evening by some excellent speakers, both within our team and outside. So the format for this evening is that after my little brief introduction, each of our speakers is going to just speak for a short period, just to really give you the highlights of their particular area of expertise. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions. So you're going to hear from Gemma Hart-Dyke, who's one of our client managers here at Brilliant Beginnings, who's going to talk about an overview of the surrogacy process if you're a UK parent going to the US. You're going to hear from Gina Marie Maddow from Conceivabilities, which is one of the leading US surrogacy agencies. You're going to hear from Rich Vaughan, who is from the International Fertility Law Group, to talk about the US legal issues. And you're going to hear from NJ Law's Kelly Blacksall, who's one of our lawyers here, who's going to talk about the UK legal side of things. So we're recording this evening's webinar, so you will be sent a link to the recording afterwards if you want to watch it back, or you may be watching it having not been able to attend live, in which case, welcome whatever time of day you're listening. If you are attending live and have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A box. You have the option to select to post anonymously if you don't want to share your name with the rest of the group. There is also the option to upvote other people's questions. So keep an eye on the Q&A box, and if there are any questions you're particularly interested in, add a vote, and we will certainly try and get to as many questions as we can at the end, but prioritise the ones that are the most popular. So just to give you a little bit of introduction about NJ Law and Brilliant Beginnings. NJ Law was the UK's first fertility law firm, established in 2009, so we've just celebrated our 15th anniversary. And we represented the very first UK parents to go overseas for surrogacy, and since then have been involved in more than 2,000 surrogacy cases in every corner of the globe. But particularly we represent UK parents going to the US because the US is the most popular international surrogacy destination. And we worked out from some recent court statistics that we'd represented parents in consistently a third of all the US surrogacy cases that have ever been granted by the UK court. And our whole team, we love what we do. We have a real philosophy here of not just practicing law, but making it work and pushing boundaries and making it more practical. So we've also been behind many of the leading court decisions that have changed the law, including advocating for rights for single parents and getting a law change to include them. And in the last couple of years, representing the first single mother who'd conceived through surrogacy in the US with both egg and sperm donors in an adoption application. And we're active campaigners for surrogacy law reform here in the UK as well. Brilliant Beginnings is our sister organisation, and we very much work as one team. It was set up by my business partner Helen and I in 2013 because we had so much demand from parents to help with the practical aspects of surrogacy abroad and in the UK, as well as the legal aspects. And we are very committed with Brilliant Beginnings to focusing on surrogacy that is ethical, legal and responsible, and it is done in a really safe, careful way. We, over the last 11 years, have honed our experience of supporting parents with going to the US, and we only work with the best US professionals. So we are independent, so the people that we recommend are the people that are there that we think are the best for you. And that's why we're so pleased to have such great speakers this evening that really do represent the cream of the crop in the States. And we understand for UK parents what really drives that desire to go overseas to the US for surrogacy, that although surrogacy is legal in the UK, it can be very long-winded, very uncertain, it can be very difficult to get through the process. So parents do look overseas to places where there is more legal certainty and a more professional approach to managing the process. And it is a bit of a village experience when you go to the US for surrogacy, with lots of different professionals working collaboratively to keep you safe, to keep your surrogate safe, to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And I guess that's reflected in our talks tonight, because all the people that you're going to hear from have a part to play in the process, and we're all used to working very closely together. So we know if you're at the early stages of looking at surrogacy that it can feel completely overwhelming. There is so much information on the internet. It's very difficult to know what to trust, how to cut through all of that. So what we really wanted to do with this seminar this evening is just to help give you the headlines, the kind of broad bones of a US surrogacy, and help you from that early stage of getting started. So we're going to kind of hopefully give you a bit of a clear sense of direction. So we're going to start with our first speaker, who is Gemma Hart-Dyke, one of our client managers at Brilliant Beginnings. And Gemma has worked as a client manager for nearly 9 years now, so has a huge wealth of experience with US surrogacy. And clients, as you'll see when you hear from her, really do rely on her for her warmth and her encouragement, as well as her knowledge. So I'm going to hand over to you, Gemma.
Thank you, Natalie. What a lovely introduction. And good evening, everybody. I'm going to be giving you a bit of an overview of the organisations that you need to have supporting you through your surrogacy journey. We're also going to look at some of the steps that you'll need to follow, a broad look at how long everything takes and how much everything costs, because those are usually the key questions that most intended parents want to know at this stage, to just get an idea of what that looks like. Sorry, I'm just waiting for my slides to catch up with me because that's what keeps me on track. So looking at first your team, as Natalie mentioned, it is very much about having good organisations who have been in the industry for a good amount of time, who are well established, who have the right expertise, particularly about supporting international UK-based intended parents, and understanding the different dynamics that come along with being based in the UK but having a surrogate in the US. And there are different organisations that you might come into contact with along the way, but the key organisations that you need to engage with will be a US fertility clinic, who will be responsible for creating your embryos, whether that's using your own gametes or with the help of an egg donor, or perhaps moving embryos from the UK over to the US for treatment. A US surrogacy agency who will find and match you with a surrogate and support you from that very beginning right the way through to the birth and a little bit beyond in most cases. You may need to engage with a US egg donor agency if you're, a lot of the agencies and clinics that we work with do have in-house egg donor programs, but sometimes you might need to look at a little bit further afield if there's something more specific that you're looking for in an egg donor. A US attorney, which of which Rich is one, who will take care of things like your legally binding contracts with an egg donor and with a surrogate, and also resolving the US parentage towards the end of the pregnancy. On the UK side of the pond is where Brilliant Beginnings and NGA law sit. So in terms of how Brilliant Beginnings specifically fits into all of those pieces of the puzzle, there are hundreds of clinics and agencies, lots of attorneys that all offer surrogacy in the US. And as Natalie mentioned at the beginning, it can be quite overwhelming and quite difficult to work out which are the right organisations for me, who is going to fit within my budget, who is going to be able to find me a surrogate within a time frame that works for me, who works in the most safe and ethical and responsible way. That can be really, really difficult to work out. So over the 10 years and more that Brilliant Beginnings has been in operation, we have established a really nice network of clinics, agencies, attorneys and other organisations that we know do things in the best way possible. And we can sit down with you and help you work out which of those organisations are going to be best for you and your particular circumstances. We don't take any financial referrals with the organisations that we work with. So the recommendations that we give are genuinely based on, this is the organisation that we think is going to work in the best way possible for you and be able to support the particulars of your circumstances. So we can help hone in on which of those organisations are best for you. And that's all through our US pathway service, which of course incorporates NGA law to help with the UK legal processes. Like, we don't just set you up with these organisations and send you on your way. Our support continues right the way through your journey. We are there to do all sorts of things, to act as a bit of an emotional support for you if you need that, be a bit of a sounding board, front loading as much as possible, sort of letting you know what's going to happen next, what to expect from certain aspects. Tell you what's normal and what we've seen before, and not to worry about this. And equally, if you come up against a situation that's a little bit trickier to unpick, we can advise on how best to approach that, pulling in different organisations, different experts to help untangle whatever that situation may be. So, we get very, very emotionally involved with our clients. I think it's really difficult to do this job without that. And we feel, a really key part of our intended parents support, who can answer questions on this side of the pond, not worrying so much about time differences and things like that, and just being there to guide you through the craziness that can be a US surrogacy journey in some cases. So let's talk a little bit about an overview of the steps. So usually the first step for most intended parents is getting your embryos in place, whether that's creating new embryos from scratch in the US, or, as I mentioned earlier, moving embryos from the UK. Most agencies that we work with will say, the best way that they can match you with a surrogate is for you to have your embryos in place, or at least a very clear plan of when those embryos are on their way or going to be created, whatever the scenario is. Then you will move on typically to matching with your surrogate. Most of the agencies we work with at the moment match within about 6 months. So that is insanely quick. We have some agencies that can match within weeks, some 3 months, some 6 months. But, it's that real manageable time scale that is one of the biggest draws, I think, for intended parents who are looking for that certainty about, when is this going to happen? When are we going to meet this incredible person who's going to help us? Once you've matched with the surrogate, she will typically go for medical clearance at your clinic. So your clinic will be saying, yep, she's healthy, she's good to go. Once that's been approved, you'll move on to legal contracts, which is in some cases, the first time you might have contact with Rich, to pull together a legally binding contract with your surrogate. Once all of those practical steps are out of the way, we can focus on the exciting journey of going through fertility treatment and hoping to get pregnant. It sounds simple, but there's obviously a lot more to it. This is just very broad steps of the process. Obviously, once the pregnancy has been established, you can then start planning being there for the birth, which is absolutely encouraged. All of our intended parents are there for the birth. You will be looking after baby from the minute the baby comes out. And then there's the process of getting home, which again, we will support you with alongside NGA law. And the final step, once you're back home, will be finalising that UK parental order, although that can start during the pregnancy. But I will leave Kelly to talk about that in a lot more detail. So roughly, how long does all this take? Again, this is kind of simplified, and there will be things that impact everybody's individual journey. But a reasonable average to have in your mind is around 25 to 30 months from setting up with Brilliant Beginnings and NGA right the way through to baby being born, with a bit of time for the parental order process within that. You can see the little breakdown there. The first few months are going to be setting up those embryos, setting up with organisations, getting the embryos in place, matching with your surrogate, and you can see so on from there. So the big question is always, how much does US surrogacy cost? There will be lots of variables that will impact the final cost to you, and sometimes that's quite difficult to predict right at the beginning. But this is one of the things that, if you're working with Brilliant Beginnings, we will sit down with you right at the very beginning of the journey and look at your budget. What is important to you? What are the elements that we need to consider specifically for your journey? But an average healthy budget that would incorporate pretty much everything: egg donor compensation, surrogate compensation, agency and clinic fees, US legal fees, UK legal fees, you would be looking at around £250,000 up to about £320,000 currently. So you won't need all of that upfront in one hit right at the beginning of the journey, and typically it's broken down, the fees are broken down into 3 sort of key stages. Right at the beginning, the bulk of the costs are going to come in with embryo creation, whatever that looks like for you, and signing up with an agency typically. The next stage of those fees is usually due at around the time of matching with a surrogate. So that could be 6 months on if your agency is quoting a 6-month match time. And the third and final stage of the bulk of the fees will be towards the end of the pregnancy, when the US and UK legal fees start to kick in. And on this next slide, I've provided a little bit of a breakdown of kind of from and to, just to give you a flavour of average costs for the different elements that you'd need to consider in there. I don't think I've seen a surrogacy journey sit at around £145,000 on that lower end of the scale for quite some time, unfortunately. But this is to just give you a bit of a flavour of what some of those differences can be. We can always send this out to you as well if you want to digest that breakdown and talk that through with you in a bit more detail after the seminar. So what are the next steps for you to think about? If you want to talk a little bit more about the specifics of your situation, you can book in for a surrogacy consultation with Brilliant Beginnings to talk about the more practical aspects of surrogacy. Or you can book in for a legal review meeting with NGA Law to talk about the specifics of the UK legal process. Or if you're feeling that you're ready to, you're at that point, you're ready to get going, particularly after all the information that we share with you tonight, you can simply start with an application for our US pathway. That is a really whistle-stop tour of everything that you need to think about for surrogacy in the US, but I hope the main takeaway from what I've tried to get across to you tonight is that, surrogacy in the US, despite being such a well-trodden path and such an incredible journey, there will always be little hurdles to overcome, twists and turns along the way, delays, frustrations, not always to the catastrophic disappointments that people often immediately think of. Sometimes it's those smaller hold-ups along the way that can be really frustrating. And it's so important to have good people around you who can support you through those steps and kind of pick you up when you need picking up and carry you through that journey. So I think that's why it's so important to work with the professionals that have the right experience, the right ethics, to make your journey as smooth as it can be, depending on, on how everything goes. I'm going to end there and I'm going to pass over to Gina Marie. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gemma, and it's really helpful to have that overview. And I think you're so right. It's such an emotional process that there are all these moving parts and different practical things to consider. But at the heart of this, there's relationships and feelings and anxieties and worries, and all of that needs to be kind of managed in a really, really careful way. But we'll come back to you in questions, I'm sure. And just a reminder to everybody that's watching, if you've got any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box and we'll pick them up once everybody has finished speaking. So next we're going to hear from Gina Marie Maddow, who is from Conceivabilities. And she is the Director of Client Development at this US agency, which is one of the leading US agencies with more than 20 years of experience and a national reach in terms of offices all over the States and surrogates in many different places. Gina Marie is here to talk about the agency process and to give you a bit of a flavour of the kind of women that act as surrogates. Often it's one of the first questions intended parents ask, who on earth would do this for me? So we're really hoping we can hear a bit more about that. She's also a 4-time egg donor and she's built her own family through IVF. So she knows all this stuff very well personally as well. So thank you for being with us, Gina Marie. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I'm happy to be here. Let me get my screen up for you. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about who becomes a gestational carrier. So, women that come to gestational surrogacy are those who value family, those who value community, those are who are of childbearing age, and those who really love volunteering or giving back to their community. And surrogacy is just another way that they can give back to those around them. Now, in terms of the pre-screening process, what conceivabilities will do for you? There is a surrogate engagement team who will pre-screen the gestational carrier, educating her about the entire process, making sure that she has time to give thoughtful consideration to all the aspects before she's really ready to proceed. We'll collect a detailed application from her. We'll collect all of her prior obstetrical records. We have a full nursing team that reviews all of those obstetrical records to make sure that they line up with the fertility clinic's standards. And at conceivabilities, there is a 95% success rate that any carrier that is matched with intended parents will pass the fertility clinic's in-person medical screening, which is really great odds for us. In addition to this is the gestational carrier's mental health screening and assessment. This is conducted by a licensed mental health professional. It's for the surrogate and her partner, and it makes sure that they're fully prepared for the journey. Make sure that they have appropriate support, make sure that they have a stable home life, and it also comes along with background checks, a criminal background check, as well as a financial background check. In terms of matching with the gestational carrier, you're going to be matched first based on whether your match is legally sound, meaning that both of your names are able to get onto that child's birth certificate. You'll be matched based on your clinic's medical standards. You'll be matched based on personalities, values, and beliefs. And conceivabilities rests on a framework called shared decision making. That's where the agency gives you and your carrier the tools to communicate and collaborate together so that you partner through this journey every step along the way, sharing in all aspects together. In terms of the support for intended parents and gestational carriers, there is a match experience team. It's led by a match manager who basically acts as your quarterback through the entire journey, guiding you where to go at each milestone. You have a clinic coordinator, someone that deals directly with your fertility center to make sure that everything is complete on their end. You'll also have access to mental health support for the intended parents, as well as the gestational carriers, as well as support groups. And then there's a full service team of experts, including legal, insurance, financial, so that at conceivabilities, you have access to all of the appropriate professionals. And now I will turn it over to Rich for the legal considerations.
All right, thank you, Gina. Natalie, do you want to do your part first?
Shall I introduce you?
Yes, please, please.
Super. Well, I'm delighted to introduce Rich, who really needs no introduction, but he's the founding principal of the International Fertility Law Group, which has unrivaled experience working with parents, particularly international parents, on surrogacy cases. I can't count how many cases we've had together. I worked on some really knotty problems, particularly around kind of COVID when there were travel restrictions, and Rich was kind of jumping on all of that to try and unlock systems for parents to help them get to their babies and so on. So he's a real hero of US surrogacy. He's also the past chair of the American Bar Association's Assisted Reproductive Technology Committee, and a proud advocate for LGBTQIA rights. And he is also a parent to 2 boys through surrogacy and egg donation as well. So he has been through this process. So Rich, shall I hand over to you?
Thank you, Natalie. And I did need an introduction after all, right? Thank you very much for that. Yeah, so I'm here to talk to you a little bit, just briefly, about US legal considerations and what the landscape looks like in the US and the different phases of the legal work here in the US. So can you take me to the slides there? Thank you. Now, what I want to start off by making clear is just to echo what Natalie had said earlier. The US is often considered a leading destination for surrogacy, considering it has a very strong foundation for legal support, societal support. Ethical surrogacy is very important in the U.S., and the medical practice has a very strong foundation, also based on ethics as well. So that's sort of the general concept of the U.S. is there's a strong foundation for this, and it's been going on in the U.S. since the mid 80s. So lots of years of experience in the U.S. Now, the thing to know about the legal framework as well is that it is not federal in the U.S. There's no federal law addressing surrogacy. It is state by state. Most states permit surrogacy in the U.S. All states permit sperm and egg donation. Most states support embryo donation. So if sperm, egg, or embryo donation are part of your journey, you'll have a lot of options for that in the U.S. If you need it. The other aspect to understanding the U.S. is that because this is state by state, the law is state by state, how we have you declared as the legal parents will also vary from state to state. Now, there's another bit of information I want to cover. In the next slide, I get into the different phases of the legal work, but there's another thing that I wanted to cover, which is at the very beginning of this process, when you start looking into the U.S., when you're talking to your lawyer, the intake, the conversation that you have with the lawyer should include a conversation about and take into consideration, where do you live? Where are you a citizen? In other words, where will the child ultimately be nationalized? Now, of course, the child born in the U.S. is automatically a U.S. citizen, but if you have multiple citizenships and you want that child to also have those citizenships, that's something your lawyer needs to know at the very beginning of the case so that we can help coordinate with your local attorneys in whatever jurisdictions are relevant to you. And this is also important because it affects where you can be matched legally and appropriately in the U.S. And there are different considerations that impact where you can be matched. Your marital status is important. Whose genetics are being used? These also affect where you can be matched. And it also affects what may need to be written into the legal contracts that are part of the process and what may need to be written into the court order that we obtain for you. And in some cases, even how the birth certificate will be prepared. So let's move on to the next slide then. Okay, now our ultimate goal as your lawyers in the US is to make sure that you become the legal parents and that the birth certificate is prepared correctly. There are generally several phases of the legal work, which are outlined here at the bottom of the slide. If you are going to be engaging in egg, sperm, or embryo donation, there is typically an agreement that must be put in place before you can proceed with the donation itself. I think our focus today is mostly on surrogacy, so I'll focus on surrogacy from this point forward. But I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about egg donation as well. So in the beginning of the surrogacy, and I think both Gina and Gemma have talked about this already, there are a number of different screenings that take place, including psychological screenings for the surrogate and medical screenings for the surrogate. And there are background checks, etc. Once those screenings are complete, and particularly when the doctor has cleared the surrogate for proceeding, then it will be time for the first substantive phase of legal work, which is getting a surrogacy agreement in place between you and the surrogate. This contract must be signed and in place before she can begin her injectable medications. And so when that contract is signed, the lawyers will send a legal clearance to the doctor. So at the beginning, in essence, the doctor has the ball, getting her medically screened and cleared. They pass the ball to the lawyers. We'll do the contract, and then we pass the ball back to the doctor. So before your surrogate can begin her injections and start taking risks by injecting herself with needles and hormones and going through these surgical procedures, that contract must be put in place. Now, generally, these contracts will take about 3 to 4 weeks on average. There's a lot of this that is very routine. These documents are basically templates that are customized to each particular case. You will typically receive the first draft. After you review it with a lawyer, your surrogate will have a separate lawyer who will go over it with her and make sure that she understands it. If there are any changes that any party wants to request, that gets negotiated, and then eventually the contract is signed. So at that point, As I mentioned earlier, the legal clearance letter will be sent to the doctor, and then you can begin working on getting pregnant. Then after you get pregnant and you're confirmed pregnant by an ultrasound that detects the heartbeat, we typically do guardianship documents. Not all lawyers do that. And there are two components to this. We want you to be thinking, first of all, about who you would appoint as a backup guardian to care for the child or children if something happens to you during this process. Of course, we don't want that to happen, but we want to be prepared in case it does. We have had it happen. We've been doing this since 32 years ago, and it's happened a few times. So it's very important to us to make sure that you are protected by having this declared in writing. You may already have this in your own wills or trusts, and if that's the case, great. We don't need to do anything. But if you don't, that's something that your lawyers here can help you with. The other aspect of this guardianship phase of the legal work is having the surrogate designate you as a guardian of the baby during the pregnancy. You've heard it already that eventually there will be a court order and you will be the legal parents at birth, typically. Most states allow us to go to court pre-birth and get a pre-birth court order. But that means that during the pregnancy, you really don't have parental rights. So one of the things we like to do to help sort of bridge the gap in this process is have the surrogate designate you as a guardian of the baby, which is basically granting you a healthcare power of attorney, which gives you legal standing and legal authority to be involved in medical decisions for the baby, to be able to talk to the OB, to view the pregnancy records if necessary, and to be present at any of the healthcare appointments for the surrogate during the pregnancy. Now, this same set of authorities can be provided through different HIPAA releases that a surrogate might sign at each clinic. We prefer having it in one global document that's referred to as a healthcare power of attorney. So that's what's done typically when you are confirmed pregnant. Then when your case progresses to the second trimester at about 14 weeks, it's time to begin the next phase of legal work, which is getting ready to go to court and to obtain a court order that will declare you as the legal parents and also instruct how the birth certificate should be filled out. This is also a fairly simple process. It varies a little bit from state to state in terms of the paperwork, but the general rule here, the gist of these court documents is that we are explaining to the court that you have an agreed matter. You are not putting a problem in front of the court to be solved. There's nothing to be fixed. There's no winner. There's no loser. There's no right. There's no wrong. It is an agreed petition for parentage. So the lawyers will spell out the facts of the case. Everybody signs off saying, yes, they agree. And then everybody will review and approve the drafted court order before it's ever presented to the judge. Most of the time, this is all that's needed, just the paperwork, and the lawyers will file the case and get the court order. On rare occasion, there may be a need for a court hearing of some kind. Any judge can always require one. Most don't, but there are a few states where this is required, and sometimes we get a new judge who doesn't understand it and wants to have a quick hearing, and they're usually short, 5 or 10 minutes at the most. So the end result of that process is a court order. This is then provided to you and to the surrogate and to the birth hospital so that they are aware that when the birth does occur, you are the legal parents. And then when the birth occurs, it'll all be lined up and ready to go. Very smooth, and everything is prepared and they're ready for you at the hospital. Now, once the birth occurs, there's a process to start the birth certificate preparation. Typically, and this varies a little bit from state to state, but typically there is a birth certificate clerk at every hospital who will have a birth certificate worksheet. This birth clerk has to register the birth of every baby born in that hospital. So they have a lot of paperwork, but the most important for this process is the birth certificate worksheet. So they'll have a few questions for you, including what do you want to name the baby? And they'll have a few questions for your surrogate. They'll complete this form and send it along with the court order to what we call the local vital records office. And that vital records office will prepare the birth certificate. Birth certificates normally take quite a bit of time, can be 8 to 12 weeks in most places. We will work together with the hospital to help get this expedited for you. So you generally will have a birth certificate in the US within about 2 weeks or less. There are a few states where there are exceptions and they are slower, and that's part of what we tell you up front so you know what to plan for. Then once you have the birth certificate in hand, you can then begin the US passport application process, which also normally takes several months, but can be expedited to within a few days, anywhere from 5 to 10 days, depending on how much you want to pay. You can pay more for faster speed almost anywhere you go in the US. So typically the amount of time that you would need to be in the US after the birth is about 3 to 4 weeks, with a few small exceptions. And then at that point, you're free to go home and then work on the UK legals, which I think Kelly is going to talk about.
Super. Thank you so much, Rich. And I'm going to introduce Kelly now, who's going to talk about the UK legal stuff. And Kelly is a lawyer with the NJ Law team and supervises our team of paralegals who are working on all these US surrogacy cases. She's now got 7 years experience of working on US cases, covering both legal advice, wills, parental order applications, and British passports. She's our particular specialist in British nationality. And we regularly say knows far more about how British nationality applies in surrogacy cases than the Passport Office, and is needing to regularly educate them in how the law works. And I'm also going to embarrass her by saying that she was instrumental in the last couple of years in helping the work that we did to rescue 46 babies that were born in the Ukraine at the outset of the war, and to bring every single one of them home safely. So yeah, fantastic stuff. And Kelly, then having embarrassed you, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about the UK legal side.
Thank you very much, Ashley, for such a kind introduction, none of which is alone. And yeah, very proud to be part of an incredible team, including the professionals that we work with. So thank you all. I am going to talk about the UK law, which there's no hiding that I've gone last, and there is a reason for that. It's because this really is the last piece of the puzzle. So the UK law is all dealt with mostly post-birth. So unfortunately, there's no sort of international harmonisation with surrogacy law, so it's not sort of recognised across the world, which means that there is a process to go through in the UK, despite having gone through the process already in the US, which so clearly explained. You will be the legal parents in the US. There will be a contract, as Rich has explained. I don't need to go into that further, but that is not recognised here. So you will need UK legal advice. We typically start quite early in the pregnancy, or even before, actually, just to make sure that you know what lies ahead. It's often helpful for your surrogate to know that there is a UK post-birth process to go through too, so they can be sort of prepared for that. We will also help you put in place a specialist will, as Rich mentioned, with regards to guardians here in the UK, so we can help you resolve that. And then, of course, the parental order, which is what brings everything in line with the position in the US. So you will get a UK birth certificate naming you both as parents, and you will also then be able to go on to get a UK passport as well. So it also resolves British nationality, assuming one of you is British. So it's a sort of complete and overall solution to bring everything in line and make sure that you are recognised as the parent here in the UK. So one of the first things you're going to have to think about after baby is born is, of course, getting home. And as Rich mentioned, you are born a US citizen if you are born in the US, and therefore your baby will be. You're typically able to get passports quite quickly after the birth in the US, and again, there's professionals who can help you with that. Now, technically, entry to the UK on a US passport for a child through surrogacy is by discretion, which means that you're sort of asking for permission by the border control officer on the day to grant you entry. Now, this is regularly given. We've never had a child denied entry at the UK border, but it is a process to sort of go through in terms of travelling on that US passport. And we typically smooth this process for our parents by providing a travel letter to explain that to the sort of border control on entering the UK. Now, with regards to the UK passport, whether your child is born British will depend on lots of different factors, including the circumstances of conception, so whose eggs and sperm were used, whether your surrogate is married or not, and also whether and how you are British yourself. So the UK legal position is that the surrogate is the legal mother until the parental order is granted, and if she's married, her spouse is the second legal parent, and that's what the parental order is designed to resolve. But that will also have some sort of circumstances affecting that British nationality. But it isn't a problem because, as I've already mentioned, the parental order resolves this fully. So it also makes your child British on the granting of the parental order. So we typically suggest that unless there's reasons otherwise that you need to travel sooner or want that security of travelling on the UK passport, to actually wait until after the parental order is granted. And as Natalie said, we've had many conversations with the passport office over the years, and it does seem to be the sort of simplest solution is to wait until you are the legal parent and able to apply for that UK passport straightforwardly. As Natalie's also mentioned, we've had to deal with quite a few different circumstances, including the UK war and COVID. So there are situations where UK passports are needed sooner, and we're kind of ready and on hand to jump in if your circumstances change and you need those passports or travel documents sooner. So in terms of the actual parental order process, it's a High Court application because it's an international arrangement. It will be heard by a High Court judge at the Royal Court of Justice. And there are 5 surrogacy judges in the High Court, all of whom we've worked with and can sort of talk you through their individual quirks and processes, but ultimately there will be at least one hearing that you'll need to attend at the High Court in order to have this granted. But before you get there, you will be asked to write some sort of detailed written evidence to show why you're eligible to make this application. And to echo what Rich said as well, in terms of this being a sort of not a rubber stamping process, but more of a formality, nobody is working against you. You know, this is very much everybody's on the same page. And as part of that, the surrogate will also have consented to the parental order being granted. And if she's married, her spouse will need to as well. So they can't actually consent to the order until 6 weeks have passed. But in all honesty, that's quite administrative in its process in any event, because by the time the application's in and been issued by the court, that 6 weeks will likely have passed. You will also have a home assessment by CAFCAS, which is the Child and Family Court Advisory Support Service in the UK. So the sort of social arm of the court who will meet with you and who will write a report to undoubtedly say that this is in your child's best interest. But as part of that, will come and visit you and see you at home with your child. So in terms of timescale, we quite loosely say sort of 5 to 12 months, and this can typically depend on how many court hearings you have, but we see on average the children and the babies that we're helping through surrogacy are around 6 months old when we're attending court. And it's a really nice attendance in terms of the hearing itself. It's quite celebratory in nature. The sort of formalities go out the window. There's photos with the judge, and it's sort of a marking of the end of what is often quite a long journey. Another part of the process is that you must start the application within 6 months. However, there's no need to delay. So there's a common misconception that you have to wait 6 weeks to apply. You don't. You can apply, and we can actually apply on your behalf while you're still overseas and get that ball rolling even before you're home. In terms of the criteria and what the court's looking at, so they will be looking at you. So you do need to have a biological connection to your child in order to be eligible for the parental order. So it will need to be, if you are in a couple, either your eggs or your sperm, or as a single applicant, your eggs or your sperm. You will also need to have a domicile in the UK. Now, domicile is quite a tricky legal concept, and I'm not going to go into it today because it's a seminar of its own, but it's not just with regards to where you're resident. So we've helped lots of British expats overseas. We've helped lots of non-British parents who live in the UK, so we can help you understand if that needs exploring, whether you are in fact domiciled. Your age, you must be over 18, and your relationship, assuming that you are applying jointly, you will need to be applying together. You can, of course, now apply as a single applicant too, but if you are in a relationship, you will need to either be married or show that you are in an enduring relationship and raising this child together. With regards to your surrogate, the court will be making sure that she consents to the application. And as I mentioned, this is the bit that has to be 6 weeks after the birth. And her consent must also be full, free and unconditional. So it's not an obligation or something that's contracted, but actually something that is freely given 6 weeks after the birth. And this, the way this is taken is a sort of paperwork process as well. So there'll be some forms that she'll need to sign in front of a US notary. Payments is another thing that the court will look at. This is something that often comes up with US surrogacy. There's another common misconception in the UK that it's illegal to pay your surrogate more than expenses. That's not quite what the law says. And of course, in US surrogacy cases, the judges are very used to seeing commercial and compensated arrangements. They will be used to seeing the figures and the compensatory elements that Gemma and Dina have talked about today. So they will be able to authorise those payments retrospectively. And in order to get there, they'll need to have all of the information, which will be provided by your US professionals, so likely through an escrow account or by an escrow account manager, to be able to formally put that to the court for them to authorise retrospectively. Finally, once all is considered and you've ticked all those boxes, the court's paramount consideration is your child's welfare. So is this in your child's best interest? And I mentioned previously, this undoubtedly will be. You know, nobody's working against you. This is a child that's much longed for, much wanted, planned for. And so it will be a sort of easy box to tick, but one that they will look into nonetheless. They'll want to see that you considered being open with your child about the circumstances of their surrogacy arrangement, and are really keen to encourage parents through openness to talk to their children about surrogacy. Just waiting for my last slide. Not because I've forgotten what it says at all. I think the last slide just says that we are happy to help, and the way in which we can do so is, as Gemma's already mentioned, through our US surrogacy pathway. So we can set up and help you with legal advice, with wills, with your parental order application on 2 different services in terms of that help to suit you best. We also have non-BB clients, so parents that come to us directly who have either already proceeded with the surrogacy journey or are looking at other destinations, and so we can give sort of independent legal advice, wills, and all the bits that we've talked about separate to that as well. I'm hoping my slides will catch up, but if they don't, I'm very happy to answer any questions if there are any, and otherwise thank you for listening.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Kelly. We could see your slides even though you couldn't, so
we're good.
Super, fantastic. Well, we've got some space for questions. You seem like a very shy audience, so please do populate the Q&A section if you do have any burning questions that you want to ask. Somebody has asked if we can share people's email addresses and contact details, and we'll be very happy to do that. We'll send you all out a link to the recording afterwards, and we can share everyone's details if you want to reach out to any of us individually. But just while waiting for any other questions, I have a few questions for each of you. I wondered if you could say something about, obviously the surrogacy journey is quite a long journey, and Gemma, you may be the first person to ask about this, but if parents are wanting to have more than one child and plan for siblings or twins, you know, what are the different ways that people do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that we do get asked quite a lot, really. So as a general rule, I think everybody would prefer to avoid a twin pregnancy if possible. It's not usually the first course of action for most intended parents. It's, you know, a twin pregnancy is generally a much higher risk pregnancy. lots of clinics would rather, will advise that you transfer just one embryo at a time. Quite often a twin pregnancy might occur if you've perhaps had 2 or 3 failed embryo transfers. And there's it's medically advised that this is the right route forward. And obviously it's something that a surrogate's going to have to be on board with. More commonly, what we're seeing more in recent years is intended parents doing tandem journeys or slightly staggered journeys. And if that is your hope, it's something that you may not know right at the beginning of your journey. But if you are thinking ahead and thinking in an ideal scenario, we'd love to have 2 children quite close together or whatever. As long as you communicate that to everybody that's supporting you, that's absolutely something that can happen. It's something that your agency is going to need to be aware of, so that that's played into the part of when they're matching you, when they're looking at, how that's all going to work. It's got to be something a surrogate is on board with as well. 2 surrogates have got to be on board with. I see Gina nodding enthusiastically. They have to both be aware that, your attention is going to be divided. One pregnancy might be harder than the other pregnancy. One surrogate might need more support from you than another. There are lots and lots of different dynamics to consider and to make sure are properly supported if you are going to go down that tandem route. But we do have a couple of clients at the moment who are on tandem journeys. So, usually the second pregnancy or the second journey will start once the first pregnancy is confirmed and everything's looking good and looking hopefully straightforward with that pregnancy, is a more sensible time to start looking to be matched with a second surrogate. Gina, I don't know if you've got anything to perhaps add to that with your experience from an agency and a surrogate's perspective.
Sure. So we are seeing a lot more what we call dual staggered journeys, which is just what you explained, which is 2 journeys at the same time, but the pregnancies are staggered. So you don't have 2 deliveries at the same time in different locations. Where we're looking to kick off the second journey is usually once the first one is getting out of that first trimester and we're going into the second trimester. That's the most preferred time to start. We do have other families who that's a bit much for them. So they'll go one after another, and that's more often referred to as a sibling journey. And the sibling journey, it could be with the same gestational carrier that helped you for your first child, or you might need a different one. But it's really just the timing on how close or how far apart you want the children to be. But the dual staggered journey is definitely gaining a lot more popularity, as it does reduce the risk associated with that multiple pregnancy.
Brilliant, thank you. And Gina Marie, I was going to ask as well if you could give us a bit more information about kind of surrogates and their motives, because the kind of culture around the law in the UK is very much that we allow, inverted commas, altruistic surrogacy, and that surrogates are unpaid. And sometimes that leads to a belief that the way surrogates are motivated to help someone else have a family is very different in the UK than in the kind of more commercial environment in the US. And I wondered if you could just tell us a bit about those motivations. Is it, frankly and bluntly, is it all about the money for the surrogates?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We actually did a significant amount of research on this to find out what the true motivations are for our gestational carriers. And what we found is most of them have been touched by the fertility industry in some way, whether it's a friend or family member who struggled to get pregnant. Maybe they have a close friend or family member who's a member of the LGBTQ community. Typically, that's where we see the primary motivation and the volunteer aspect. So a lot of the women who are surrogates are blood or organ donors. They enjoy fostering, enjoy volunteer work of other kinds. Now, the financial aspect is, of course, important. You can't talk about several thousands of dollars and not have that at least be in part a motivating factor. But what we find is it's not the sole or the primary motivator.
And I think in reality, that's very similar to the way things work over here. And it's, what we see certainly is that there are really strong relationships between intended parents and their surrogates, which typically, endure for a lifetime if that's what people want. So it's you know, a very close and heartfelt relationship. And Rich, I wondered if you could talk to us. One of the questions we often get asked by parents is, you know, which is the best state to go to for surrogacy? And I know you talked a little bit about, like, you know, personalized advice on different options and so on. But you know, how would you answer that question?
My answer to the question is there's no one state that's the best. There's a misunderstanding that maybe California is the best or something. I mean, it certainly has a lot of case law and statutory law to support it in surrogacy, but this is a massive production. All of it is a massive production. And at the very center of this is this surrogate parent relationship. This is a human endeavor. It is an emotional endeavor. And so you've got to find the right person. And the only way to find the right person is to leave your options open and not unnecessarily restrict your options just because of geography or where you think the law is better. We've gotten our court orders for parents in all states. It's just a matter of making sure at the beginning you know which states are appropriate, legally appropriate for you, and then leaving the window as wide open as you can to finding the right match.
It's all really in the planning at the beginning and knowing kind of where those parameters are.
Yes.
Brilliant. And then Kelly, I know you talked about the kind of welfare assessment and CAFCAS, and we know that parents often feel very anxious about that. You know, they've had this child they've waited for so long. You know, why are they being assessed as if they were adopting a child? So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, you know, is there any chance that CAFCAS might say no and you might, you know, not be able to keep your child? How does that fit into the process?
Yeah, of course. And I think it's completely understandable to be anxious of the process, but it's not necessary. It's nothing compared to what most people experience in terms of an assessment, which is adoption, where you are adopting an unknown child, where you're having someone sort of assess you. And I use the word assessment quite lightly in surrogacy cases because this is a child that you are genetically related to, you are already caring for, you are already the legal parents of in the US. You know, you've already gone through this process. So it's very light touch, I think, is the first sort of reassurance that we give to parents going through this. The other thing to touch on is that the most asked question we get is, what if the surrogate changes their mind, or what if my baby gets taken away? So in the instance of a negative CAFCAS report, which I don't think I've ever seen one. No. So they're completely unheard of in the first instance. But even in that remote rare scenario where a not positive CAFCAS report was filed, it is the judge's sort of decision and discretion whether to listen to that. And in all honesty, the only way I think a sort of not positive report could be filed is if you didn't meet the criteria and weren't actually eligible in the first instance to apply, which would have been resolved much earlier on than sort of that part of the assessment. So it's understandably something that parents worry about, but it shouldn't need to be. And we can give lots and lots of support, make sure you feel prepared for that meeting, and sort of give you the nuances of each of the CAFCAS officers whom we've worked with to make sure that you feel prepared for that meeting. But it is a very small yet important part of a bigger process.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back as well to what Rich was saying about it all being in the planning, that if, you know, you do not meet the criteria, that we wouldn't then be advising you to make a parental order application at all. We would be looking at a different kind of solution. And we've had people in those categories, so parents who don't have a biological connection, where we've applied for an adoption order, parents that aren't domiciled in the UK. So it is about making the right application from the beginning rather than kind of risking getting it rejected.
And I always say to parents that the court and CAFCAS love surrogacy. If you can imagine some of the quite difficult, contentious cases, especially in the High Court, that the High Court judges are seeing, everybody loves a surrogacy. And actually the UK High Court judges lump them together. So they have them on a day in court where they have sort of back-to-back hearings, because they love them so much and because it's just a nice thing for them to be involved in. We've recently had the president of the family division ask to be involved in surrogacy cases because he wanted to add something nice to his plate. So nobody's working against you, and I can't stress that enough. And everybody loves surrogacy. So it's hopefully, although it can be quite a frustrating process to go through after the birth, once you've also already followed sort of what's quite a lengthy process, it is a positive resolution to mark the end of the journey.
Yeah, fantastic. Good. And we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I wondered if we could finish by would you all like to share your top tips for intended parents who are just at the starting out stages? I'm not going to put anyone on the spot to go first, so whoever puts their hand in first.
I'll jump in. I'll jump in. I would say stay patient, stay diligent, and stay proactive. Be involved. You do involve a lot of professionals to help you through the process, but stay involved. Be proactive. Don't expect that they're just going to handle it all. And most of the time they do. Right? But it's an emotional process. And so delays cause more anxiety because of how emotional this is. Stay involved. And then you can help reduce some of that anxiety and be patient. As I mentioned, this is a process that is as big of a production as it is. It's a human process. And there are variables, some of which cannot be controlled. And so you might have to expect a few speed bumps along the way, but you will get there. And so again, stay patient.
Brilliant.
I'll piggyback off that one with the patience for sure. I mean, a lot of times we hear from intended parents that they want the fastest match right away. How quickly can they get matched? It's not about the fastest match. It's about the right match. The right match makes all the difference. And you don't want just whoever is next in line. You want the match that's going to help you complete your family, help and be able to support you. And then trusting the professional partners that you have, and being patient, even though it does take time to move through the steps, but the steps are there for a reason and for your protection and help.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm just going to echo what we've said throughout here, which is to plan and good preparations, getting that advice really early and making sure you find the right team for you as early as possible so that you've got sort of that roadmap to the way forward, with speed bumps, to use the analogy, but making sure that you're going in with your eyes wide open and planning as early as possible.
Brilliant. And Gemma, have you got, last but not least, anything to add?
I feel like I have to really pull something out of the bag now. I mean, I think what everybody has said is absolutely spot on, but I also think it's really important that, kind of away from what's happening in the US and with everybody that's supporting you in the US, I think it's really, really important to have people in your close circle that you can trust and open up to, whether that's family, friends, trusted colleagues who have become friends, because as we keep saying, it's such an emotive journey, and the majority of the time, so many things to celebrate and be absolutely overwhelmed and delighted about. But there are times when you just need somebody that you can cry to or open up to or just lean on without judgment, and that's going to be there for you. And I think that is, as much as the professionals that are supporting you will give that to the best of their ability within that professional capacity, nothing beats being able to curl up on the sofa with your best friend or your partner or your mum or whoever and have a cup of tea or crack open the wine and just purge. I think that's really important. It's very difficult to try and do this as a solitary unit, if that's just you and your partner, or if you're a solo parent, just taking it all on yourself. I think you need somebody who you can just completely be yourself with whilst going through this.
Yeah, so it's a lot, isn't it? But I think, as hopefully we've all got across there's lots of people wanting to help and support and make that journey easier, and that's what all of us do with the different pieces of the puzzle. And I often say to parents, and I think particularly parents who are crossing borders for surrogacy, that it is like putting together this huge jigsaw puzzle, and you need to put each piece in place in order to kind of make sure that that whole picture is there. But we're here to help make sure that you don't skip any steps, that you get the right advice, and that you avoid the speed bumps as far as possible, and we help manage you through them when they do happen. So thank you very much for attending. As we've said, we will send out the recording of this, and if any of you have got any questions kind of following up, please do feel free to email any of us. We'd be very happy to speak to you. I'm sure there's lots of information and resources available on all of our websites as well, so we'll send you some links to that. But thank you very much for attending this evening, and we hope to see you again soon.